Hello and welcome. Hope you're doing well. I am here working on my O-gauge train layout, doing some track work. And in this video, I wanted to share with you how I make my own insulating track pins for Lionel tubular track. As you can see, I have some turnouts here, some Lionel MPC era 027 turnouts. Funnily enough, they're all right hand switches. I got a fourth one over there. And I got these for a pretty good deal at the train store recently. Well, one of them I already had before. I actually had two before, but the second one was a left hand switch that I'm not using anymore. But anyway, I got these for a good deal. They were in a box off to the side with all of the better switches in the boxes and stuff. But these were well used. Most of them were missing track pins, and some of them had some light surface rust on the rails. But all the ones I got cleaned up nicely, and they all work great, including the switch motors. And I paid $10 a piece for each of them, and that included the controllers. So I got a pretty good deal on all of those. But anyways, like I said, most of them had no pins. And if you know how these work, you'll know that in the diverging part right here, the two inside rails, you need insulating track pins because that is how the anti-derail feature of these switches work. When the train hits these rails, it jumps the common voltage over to these rails, which powers the switch motor. So if you're coming from this way and it's set wrong, it'll throw itself so the train doesn't derail, which is great. But these two pins need to be insulating pins, and this one pin is the only one that I got out of all four, or actually five turnouts. Like I said, I have one that is now out of service. So I could get some more track pins, but there's an easier and cheaper solution, and that is to use a toothpick as your insulator. However, I've been using toothpicks for a while now, but for me they're kind of annoying and don't always work well, because 9 times out of 10, even after I try to crimp down the track some, they don't fit in there snug. And as you're moving the track around, getting it all set, it can slide in there. And actually, you can see an example of that right here. I can't get that one out, so that toothpick's stuck in there. But I came up with a better solution. I had some of these in my drawer, some 3/32 styrene tubing, and these work a lot better than the toothpicks. They fit in there snug. There we go. I guess you can't really see it twisting because it's white on white, but unlike the toothpicks, they aren't going anywhere. So here's how I go about making one of these pins. It's pretty self-explanatory, but we're gonna take our styrene rod and cut it to length. And I usually like to leave it where there will be about a 1/2 inch inside each side of the track. So about that long. Now before we go and put the track together, I'm gonna give the styrene rod a quick sand, and this will make sense in just a little bit. Just give that a little sand. Once it's nice and scuffed, wipe any of the dust off of it, and then put it together like any old track pin. Line up your two metal pins as you push the track together. And there we go. But we're not done yet. As long as you have the metal track pins, you can butt the two rails up together. But with the insulated pins, you want to make sure you leave a gap between the rails, because that will obviously defeat the purpose of insulating the two separate rails. And in the case of the turnout, that is even more important, because that will cause the switch motor to be energized all the time. It'll be constantly trying to throw the switch. So it's important to leave a gap, but there is a problem with these gaps if you make a insulating pin like this. And that's because on a regular track insulator, they have this section right here which prevents the rails from being pushed together like that. It sticks out some to prevent the rails from being pushed together and making contact, even though it's insulated on the inside. But I have found a solution for this using styrene as track insulators, and I like to take some of this, which is it's called contour putty. It's basically like filler for styrene. And as you can see, I've done these joints right here. I will smear some in that gap, and this fills it and makes it smooth for the wheels to go over and the rollers if it's on the center rail. But it will also act like here and prevent the rails from pushing together and making contact. So all I do is put a little glob of it over the joint. Don't need too much. And we're just gonna pack it smooth, pack it flush with the rail, but we're gonna pack it into that gap. And that is where sanding the styrene rod came into play. That'll give it a little better adhesion to the rod. And there it is, a little closer view. So now all we gotta do is wait for it to dry, then we can take off the excess and sand it smooth. There isn't a dry time on here, so I'm not exactly sure how long that is, but I'm just gonna give it overnight, and this stuff usually dries by then. So I'll be back in the morning when it's all dry. Well, it's now the next day, and all of that putty is now dry. So we can now go and remove all of the excess and make it flush with the track. Now this stuff dries solid, but not like rock hard like actual plastic. The best I can liken it to is kind of like plaster. If you put pressure on it, it'll crack and crumble. So it'll sand real easy. And if you got a lot of excess, you can use a little flat blade screwdriver or a knife or something and scrape it off that way. To get it smooth to the rails, I like to use one of these sanding sticks that you can get at Hobby Lobby. Just make sure not to scratch the rails too much. And here they are, all sanded smooth and flush with the rails. I did quite a bunch of them. I got some here for my middle track. There's a railroad crossing circuit in that. I got all the turnout insulators. This is a isolated rail for a crossing. And then I've got my yard over here. Those are on the center rail, so I can cut power. So there we have it. That is how I make my own DIY tubular track insulating pins using styrene rods and some of that contour putty stuff. Now, honestly, the contour putty is entirely optional. You can just skip that and use only the styrene rod, but it just gives a little better security for, as I mentioned, the rail getting shoved into what you don't want to be touched. And also it fills that gap for the wheels and your pickup rollers. So it does add a little extra protection and smooth running, I guess. But anyways, just wanted to share that little tip with you. I hope you enjoyed and maybe found it useful. And I want to thank you for watching and have a nice day.